G'day, anyone out there? I know it's an impromptu sort of live stream. I better get the background off. For some reason, I'm wearing a white t-shirt and it's just really mucking everything up. Just let me knock the background out. None. Thank the friggin' hell for that. It's gone. Oh, we got two people. Yes, all of a sudden I decided to do a live stream. Had one of those moments. As you do. Just get my shit together because it's just impromptu. I just basically loaded it up about a minute ago. That's how close it is. Finite. There's hardly anyone here. There's only one person watching. Obviously, when I do impromptu things like that. Yeah, give me a sec. G'day, Tom. There's only a few of us here, Tom, at the moment. What a coincidence that today is also a public holiday in the Czech Republic. Good for you. Well, I hope you're having a good day, good public holiday. Actually, last time I was in Prague, it was about 2006 when I'd gone to see the World Cup soccer in Germany. So, yeah, I had a great time in the Czech Republic. I just wish I'd stayed there longer, So anyway, maybe next time I'm that way. You've got a beautiful country. Let me put it that way. And I enjoyed the ruins and stuff like that. I'm a bit of a archaeology and history buff, so I enjoy that sort of stuff. Well, like a lot of people, probably been listening to all the geopolitics and all that sort of stuff, and what's happening in Europe currently and stuff like that with the Nord Stream pipeline. And when you get basically stories like this, okay, which is fair enough. But it is a beautiful capital compared to many others, so it's one of my favourites. Anyway, Nord Stream sabotage. Blame sees EU. And you can actually see from the media and all that, they're already pointing the finger at Russia and, it's their fault. They blew it up. They don't have to blow it up. All they have to do is turn off the taps and not worry about it. And then you had a Polish politician that recently said, fantastic job, America. I mean, who does it serve? If things get dicey through the winter months, some European countries could have caved in, like Germany in particular, and, done a cozy deal with Putin to open up Nord Stream 1 or Nord Stream 2. Actually, the Russians wanted to get them into Nord Stream 2. But, both of them basically have been sort of damaged in a sense. And there were 3 explosions. And I would say, Biden and his administration says we'll do anything that it takes, and this would have taken professional people. There were some UAVs over that area as well that were noticed. This is in shallow waters, close within the exclusive economic zones of both Sweden and Denmark. Very close to those sort of regions, very well patrolled, and I don't think Russians would have got into that sort of area without being seen. And so this seems more like a a US black ops operation than anything else. So basically, they just want to knock out the capacity for the Russians to ever supply Germany. So it's really saying to the Germans, forget about it altogether. We've severed the link. That's what it is. Russians wouldn't be so stupid to sever the links. Even in the Ukraine war, they've been avoiding hitting pipelines because at the end of the day, whether they win or lose, they still need to export gas out of those pipelines into Europe to make, there's still a revenue. You go to war for economic and strategic reasons. You don't go to war to destroy your capacity to make money. It's the other side that does. And this is a very reckless and dangerous thing which the US are doing. I believe that the US is behind it. It stinks of their sort of approach. Arrogant. Probably they use the British to do the dirty work. But arrogant and completely and utterly, devoid of the considering the consequences. The current, Western powers are they are drunk on power, drunk on, their wokeism and that their way or the highway. And they're putting at great risk the global stability and global peace. I mean, the biggest threat to global peace is the US in the way it's behaving, quite clearly. That doesn't excuse what Russia did. No, Russia broke international law, illegally invading into the Ukraine. That's, I'm not going to basically apologize, be a Russian apologist. I criticize both sides. But the reality is, this is the last thing Europe needs in the middle of going into winter and in the middle of a crisis. So it's just crazy politics coming out of Washington, unfortunately. And these people, are out of control in their behavior. They're putting a lot of people at risk in terms of the, hunger, freezing to death, all sorts of things. This is extremely irresponsible. So, and you're not going to win a war against Russia by knocking their pipelines out. This is basically to sever the links to say to those Germans, you're not going to be using that anytime in the future. Get used to use it to getting your supplies from the US, Norway, and elsewhere. That's basically what they're telling them to do by doing that. So, the weak link in this crisis is Germany because it's so dependent because of its own, foolish errors by making itself so dependent on Russian oil and gas. I mean, this is the area. This is one of the Greek. I'll just go to this one. So this is one of the Greek TV ones. So it's in Greek. So sorry, I do apologize in that regard. But it's basically this is the island. There's Sweden. So there's Sweden, and pretty much it's down here. There's Denmark, and there's Sweden. This island here. These are where the 1-2 incidents, and the third one down here. So Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 were taken out, both of that. And these were actually detected by Swedish seismological devices. So they quite clearly they were explosives. And to get into these shallow waters undetected and get out, that's special ops. That's special forces. And the Swedes patrol all this area with their small subs and all that, and would know if there were any Russian subs in the area. And they would have said that quite clearly that we detected Russian subs. They detected no Russian subs. There were UAVs in the area, and they were Polish UAVs. And I would not be surprised after a Polish politician said that, I forget his name now, but he said, thanks to the US for doing that. Let's say he didn't keep his mouth shut. It's quite clear who's behind it, and Poland probably assisted them because the Polish do hate the Russians. Simple as that. I mean, they've got their reasons, historical reasons. I don't point the finger at anyone. But the reality is, the British media and many others tried to point the finger at Putin. Why would you destroy your own pipeline when you can actually just turn it off at the Bowser and not give anything through? Why would you destroy your own infrastructure? There's always going to be peace at some stage, and you can actually reuse that infrastructure to push things. Now, if it's destroyed and damaged severely, and water gets into it and actually erodes it even further, you've just lost billions of dollars of infrastructure. That'd be stupid. When you can just turn off the tap. There's no economic interest in doing that. But the thing is, it could piss off the Russians to such a degree where they may send some of from one of their northern Arctic, their main Arctic sort of. I'm trying to remember the name now. What is it called? I'm trying to remember their submarine base in the north. Anyway, they may send potentially they could send one of their ships into the north, Atlantic, and sever the cables connecting the US and Europe and put economics, banking, and a whole lot of it in disarray. So, I mean, the Americans are playing a very crazy game here by attacking the Nord Stream pipeline 1 and 2. This is my personal opinion, and it just reeks of their sort of tactics. Arrogant, and I mean, going too far. People don't destroy their own infrastructure. It's usually others that do it. And if they're not careful, the Russians just may take a bit of revenge and knock part of their infrastructure that runs through international waters. So, two can play at that game, and this sort of escalation is becoming far too dangerous and far too precarious, especially for Europe. Things are not looking bloody good in that regard. At the moment, even in Britain, how crazy is that new Prime Minister of Britain? She's absolutely insane. The interest rates are, those long 10-year yields, they're already up to 4.2, and things are really becoming precarious. You've got the tightening of the actual, the Bank of England, and then she's a lunatic. Just, she's got all these sort of things that she wants to do, and it's really to support her friends rather than actually trying to manage the economy. She's really not coordinating. Her finance ministry is not coordinating with the Bank of England. And that's actually, there are a number of financiers that I've heard. I've been watching some people that have some contacts in Citibank and a few other places. And I've got I know some people as well. And pretty much they're going, are the British crazy? She needs to go, basically. She needs to be kicked out. She's beyond a cartoon character, Jonathan. She's dangerous. The way she's behaving, she has the potential of causing an economic collapse in Britain. The woman needs to go, yesterday, not today, yesterday. That's how bad she is. I don't know where they found her. They found her in basically a cereal box, but she's useless. I thought Boris the Clown was bad. She's even worse. These people are so, entitled. They think that they are special. They're all part of that Davos group. They're basically lunatics. They've got no idea. Arrogant lunatics that are basically putting everything at risk. So crazy stuff. G'day, Gary. Pretty much, in a sense, will bring you to your knees. The thing that people need to understand is that wokeism, the current woke agenda, is part of a long-term strategy by the elites around the world to destroy the middle classes. When they tell you you will own nothing and you'll be happy and you'll be eating kibble while you're plugged in to the matrix, that they really believe this. And they, not only these 10 families that control the whole world, they think you should be grateful that they give you the kibble and the social media stuff to basically to let's say to waste your mind on. That's the future that they have to offer. It's just crazy stuff. I mean, when we look at oil production, this is out of oil production in the UK. You went from practically nothing up to 140. This is in millions of cubic meters. There was a bit of a dip in the 90s, then a back up, and then you had this decline. And then after 2015, it was a massive decline because there was the underinvestment in all petrochemicals in Britain. This here could have been dealt with shale oil and gas. But, with the woke agenda that was driving British policy, that was abandoned. That is why you can't afford the lavish lifestyle you have in the UK, because cheap energy determines your living standards. Without cheap energy, you can't produce goods and services at a competitive price. You can't actually do anything. The modern world was created on cheap petrochemical products, not on bullshit, And the only reason they were able to mask the debasement of currency, they were able to print money like there was no tomorrow, and kept on printing money for decades. And the only reason they could do is because they could mask the devaluation. Because even though they were debasing the currency, and technically speaking, that would have created inflationary pressures and made things more expensive, because of the productivity that energy provided, great productivity, cheap energy, and the automation that came out of that energy that was able to produce the modern computer technologies and stuff like that. Because when you've got, it takes, quite a number of barrels. I can't remember. There's a number of barrels that it takes of oil to produce one microchip. You take that energy density out of the economy, everything becomes expensive. Everything becomes scarce. Your living standards declined rapidly. That's what's been happening. This is an official document out of the British government. This is import dependency. Import dependency. So as you can see, back in the 70s, you were getting it from the Arabs. And then about 80s, when you started producing your own North Sea oil, and then it sort of dipped, and then you doubled down and started investing a bit more in exploration. And then by 2005, things dropped off, but you didn't actually continue getting into gas and stuff like that, because there's plenty of gas fields in that area. There's also shale oil and gas on the land, but also in the sea, there's also gas fields. I mean, the Norwegians have been tapping into it, but Britain just stopped because it went onto this woke agenda, building windmills and solar farms and tidal wave devices and all that. Extremely expensive, very inefficient, and produces bugger or miniature amounts of energy. You guys went up in about 2015, which is about when the woke agenda really hit the banking sector, and they were no longer going to be giving money. This is what happened. So you basically started even reducing your imports. This is how crazy it became, because it all became windmills and solar farms. And all that happened is, slowly over those years, what has actually happened is you've got this slow creep in cost. Every year, your power bills go up and up and up. small, because the government sort of covers it. But it's, now it's getting to that crescendo with this current crisis and all that. So it's just absolute nonsense what they've actually done. What was the other thing? There was something else, but anyway, ask me questions. You may remind me of things that I need to see. What is Scotty doing? G'day, Scotty. Bloody how are you? Spring live stream in the middle of the week on us. Oh yeah, you know what I'm like. I just decided I saw this. I'm going. And I just went and it was also another, that discussion that I had anyway. I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to name names. But after realizing how bad the economics in the UK is, and then you've got a major, even the health system there's collapsed completely. I mean, you had 130 odd thousand nurses and doctors and all that leave go back to Europe, and no replacements. And you've got ambulances that don't turn up for days in some cases. It's just the place has gone to buggery. Things were done in such a haphazard way, in such a disorganized way. It's just gone crazy. And, Britain at this stage is in a decline. And there is even a potential risk, if things get worse, for Scotland to go its own way and say, bugger it, we're rejoining Europe. Not that that's going to help them much, but, it'll just be people, when they get desperate, they do crazy things. It's just what happens. It doesn't mean it's sensible things. You can get a lot of non-sensible policies in that sort of environment very, very easily. So, yeah. Yes. Eat bugs, own nothing, and be happy. Exactly. What's wrong with you guys? Especially you bodybuilders, you've been on to powders for years. What's a couple of bugs in between the powder? I was going to throw that in. Wacky toaster. Oh, that's all we need. Europe going to hell in a handbucks and wacky toaster turning up. throw a grenade in the mix. How screwed are we here in Europe? You are. Basically, you are. You're in the wrong continent. In January this year, I needed an ambulance. There was a 5-hour delay before one could cut. Yeah. It's in some areas in the UK, it's been like the next day, or in some rural areas even longer. It's absolutely crazy. They've had to call back again to get an ambulance to come out because for some reason they fell between the cracks. I suppose it must have been a submarine attack on the line. Do you agree? No. If it was by the Russians, no. I think it was special forces, and I think it would have been miniature subs. And let's not forget the Swedes have very good anti-submarine warfare capabilities and very good detection. They detect Russian subs all the time, and their subs are very quiet. I mean, they actually were able to do multiple runs against one of the US carriers, and they were not detected. This was years ago, and one of the classes, they actually sent it over to the US to do a bit of analysis. And I've been studying military affairs for a very long time. That's why I've got all those periodicals and books and the strategic study stuff. So that's like archaeology and that geopolitics and stuff like that has been something that I've been involved for many decades. And I can tell you that if it was any Russian sort of stuff, it would have been detected. Russians have sent smaller things out of Kaliningrad there, and they've been detected by the Swedes. So this is very shallow waters. We're talking about 70 meters. It's very hard to get in and get out without, let's say, because the interesting thing was the Swedish government, what they said, oh, it was in our exclusive economic zone. And if somebody in your exclusive economic zone, while it's not your territorial, that means you can't illegally transit through a territorial things. You can't attack infrastructure within your exclusive economic zone either. The exclusive economic zone, there are legal protections under the law of the sea that protect infrastructure and stuff like that. It's actually an act of war to attack infrastructure. So that the Swedes were actually acting neutral about their own exclusive economic zone just seemed very strange sort of language when they know quite clear what the international law stipulates. It's basically an act of aggression, an act of war, anybody that does something like that in somebody else's exclusive economic zone. So that sort of got me thinking, that seems very strange to say something like that. Rather than having this condemnation, you don't hear any condemnation. And you're only hearing the US media and others saying, oh, it must have been the Russians. But they're not making these big, outrageous condemnations just in case they get caught with their pants down. So, but they're using the media. So officially the government's not saying anything, but you've got all these media groups and all that innuendos. Oh, must have been the Russians, like BBC thing. That's why I showed you. When I actually saw that Nord Stream leak, and they're talking about, they've even got somebody here. Ukraine early went further, accusing Russia of a terrorist attack. I mean, you just have to look at the sort of language and you go, okay. I mean, I'll just put it on the screen. And you can see there's Russia, there's Finland, there's Estonia, Latvia, there's Kaliningrad. And here's the island. And pretty much it's because there's some islands here, through here, up to here, that are part of Denmark. You've basically got, it sort of runs, overlaps, the Nord Stream overlaps part of the Danish and the Swedish exclusive economic zone. And those two attacks were on the Nord Stream 1, and that one was on Nord Stream 2. This is the one that Russia actually wanted to set up. They wanted to basically service this one and actually get the Germans to use this one. One, because it had more capacity and they could actually send more through and make more money compared to this one. So the last thing that they would have wanted is to knock this one out and that one. Now they've got no option. Pretty much their link to Germany has been severed. So who does it serve? It's only one power that it serves. Exactly, Gary. Russia could just turn off the tap, and that's what they've been doing occasionally. They haven't even destroyed infrastructure, gas infrastructure. They've avoided attacking or in any way damaging gas infrastructure in the Ukraine, where they're heavily involved. They're going out of their way to avoid damaging such infrastructure. So why would they do this, where it's one of the key connections to a country which could go either way politically, because of their vast demand for energy? Germany is so hungry for energy for its industries that its own industries are basically screaming to basically lower, to get back to using Russian gas and sort of lower the actual. They're criticizing their foreign minister, the Green, from the Green Party, and pretty much there's a lot of pressure from German industry to start using Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. So, it makes no sense for when Russia could basically pull away from the anti-Russian alliance, Germany potentially, to destroy their own facility. This is America. This is basically severing and saying to the Germans, no, you're not getting back into bed with the Russians. We've severed your link. You're either dependent on us or you go under. So they basically just put a gun to their head and say, this is the future, live with it sort of approach. So, you have to be gullible to sort of fall for the propaganda coming out of the BBC and people like this. They'll just talk about crap, So, yeah. But there's a lot of innuendo at the moment trying to point the accusing finger at Russia. So, Intel, how are you, mate? Yes, it is. It is one of those topics. And that's the main thing, that they could turn the damn thing off, and they have in the Ukraine on a number of occasions. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, they do have mini subs. They get deployed off Virginia class subs and Los Angeles class subs. They do, yeah. So I'm going to France for Christmas, taking some blankets, I suppose. Good idea. You may need them. Take some food with you as well. Otherwise, you'll be on kibble. Actually, you'll be on grubs and insects. Oh, God. Well, yes and no. There's a lot of people that actually left the industry, nurses and doctors, because of the because of the mandates. Let's not forget, there's a massive shortage of nurses in Victoria and Queensland. I wonder why. Because there was even stronger pressure in those two states on mandates. So, yeah, it's more than just the seasonal flu. We've had the seasonal flu over and over again. The big reality is that a lot of there is another issue also. It's a demographic and an intergenerational thing as well. That's another problem. Most of the public service is the average age is in the late 40s or early 50s, and that's a problem in itself as well. So, yeah. Yep. And down here, no grains and especially seed oils. Grape wines for the French. Yes. And brie. What about brie and camembert? Yummy. Yes, I could sit there and sort of enjoy some of that stuff myself in that regard. Yeah, there's going to be the biggest problem at the moment in Europe. As I see it, is and to some extent there is a bit of inflicted here. The self-inflicted thing is that they should have stood up to the Americans and said, no, you're not going to basically turn Europe upside down. But on the other hand, also, Europe failed miserably. Problem is, the European bureaucracy, it's the reason why Britain got out. And I can understand why Britain got out. Wasn't the smartest thing. They could have stayed in and pressured. They could have blackmailed Europe into reforming by saying, we're not going to allow any decision to go through until you guys make massive reforms to the bureaucracy in Brussels. What should happen is every single country should appoint their own people. You should have no bureaucracy in a traditional sense in Brussels. All that should be is people that get appointed for 1 year to committees, and those committees are advisory committees that provide advice on certain policy areas to the ministers, the Council of Ministers, and to the European Parliament. That's how it should work, because they don't need to administer anything else. It should be that, and they should basically then have small sort of commissions or organizations that have responsibility for dispensing like monies for certain programs or whatever that get established. And they should be bureaucrats that come out of the nation states. So they are linked to those countries. They're not independent from those countries. What has actually happened is Germany in particular, as and sort of the people around that sort of, the Davos people around, controlling Brussels, they have worked together closely to run this agenda. And the agenda is to woke Europe and to change Europe's, um, character, pretty much. You just have to look at the agenda on, um, your own history, your nations, your culture are irrelevant. We're just going to create this big melting pot, and we're just going to basically wipe your existence out. And that was their policy. Where if you had basically standing committees where representatives from the bureaucracies of all the different European countries came in and collaborated and worked together to come up with policies which they could provide to the Council of Ministers, and then the European Council of Ministers, the actual politicians that are elected, not bureaucrats, would then review this sort of stuff and consider it, either approve it or not, or amend it or whatever. That's how it should work. You should have advisors. The advisors shouldn't be running the politics like what happens now for certain interest groups, because that's what they do. The bureaucracy is out of control. It runs Europe. And it runs Europe for Davos and all these other multinationals and groups, not for the people of Europe. That's why Europe's in a mess that it finds itself. The other thing is, why was Greece allowed to ever have so much debt? Greece, Cyprus, Italy, these sort of countries, they've got a lot of gas fields in the south, and in particular Greece and Cyprus. Those sort of gas fields, when the crisis hit, they could have basically said, look, we will basically underwrite this and you will pay it off in gas. We're not going to buy gas from the Russians. You can produce it. It would have rebalanced the Eurozone. It would have meant that it would have given an export product for the South to sell to the North and rebalance the balance of payments. And it would have stabilized and also provided some energy independence for Europe as well. So the woke bureaucracy and their windmills and solar farms have rendered Europe into a mess of dependencies. And, that's why Europe finds itself in that mess that it is. So it's thrown away its national character. It's thrown away, it feels guilty for all its achievements. It's crazy, the sort of thinking that's actually happening there. It's just bizarre and all that. Europeans are encouraged to hate themselves. It's just ridiculous where things have got to. I put my resignation in today as a medical scientist. Wow, what an amazing pressure off my shoulder. Should have done it ages ago. Okay. So you're definitely going to do the other job, moving out of medical science into doing some other stuff. I'm gonna be running on the weekend a Zoom session, so I'm gonna power it up and I'll pop in now and then. Hopefully I can see you there and we can have a bit of a chat. Sometimes you just have to pull the pin. I'm just lucky that I work in an environment where I enjoy the work that I do and I enjoy the company of the people that I work with. But you know what they've just recently told us? That in October, we're going to be all doing some woke seminars. So we're going to be conditioned. I'm not kidding you. This is what's happening across industry, schools, and everything. They are trying to brainwash us. You will comply and you will do this sort of stuff. It's pretty much, as I said, their goal is to destroy the middle classes and impoverish us to such a level, because you can't have democracy without middle classes. I can't remember there was an ancient Greek person that actually said it, but I can't remember the name of the ancient Greek person. I think it was a historian who basically said, or a philosopher who said that, democracy is only possible with a middle class. Without a middle class, you cannot have, you have tyranny. And it's really what it is. Once everybody's impoverished and everybody's a peasant and they are the new aristocrats, you've got no power. You basically, and this is what they're doing. They're destroying You know, they've also doing another thing. They're using climate change. They're using all these other woke agendas and all that in order to manipulate the minds of young people. They're turning the young people against the older people, and also they're turning the younger people against themselves. Everybody's sort of isolated. There's no community anymore. And it's easy then to negotiate, because if everybody identifies with whatever they like and all that, they're an individual, just this bullshit, but controlled individual, because that's what they are, a controlled individual. You know, you end up a situation where, as a society, you are rendered a slave without even knowing it. You're just not a slave in name, but you're really a slave to that system, and then they hook you up with, this is why they could print money and stuff like that and all this, with a lot of, you know, sort of tying you into the welfare system and stuff like that, and making you dependent on the system. And it's how it works, really, how they impoverish society. I mean, in Britain, for instance, I'll give you some stats. If you go back a couple of decades, Britain had practically no food banks. Britain today has 3,700 food banks and rising. Pretty much from, remember what I showed you, that sort of collapse in sort of energy production, which was around about 2000, a bit after 2000. Well, in that last 20 odd years, you've had this escalation rise in food banks because people can't afford food. So you're at home looking at your TV with your kibble, your processed stuff, and now you cannot even afford that to the same extent. So yeah, Britain went from very practically no food banks up to well over, it's getting close, I'd say by the end of next year, it'd probably be 4,000 food banks. That's how bad it is when, large parts of your population require to go to external entities to get their food. So it's very bad. And the current politicians have no idea what they're doing. They're so badly mismanaging this current situation. They're not even taking any policy positions to improve your own energy production. So it's pretty bad. I'm furious with the Greek government that they still haven't started investing in the gas fields, and I'm furious that they haven't turned on additional, coal-fired power stations in the north. There was no need, even with, I mean, Germany themselves aren't going coal, zero emissions from coal until about, and you know 20 in about a decade's time, and Poland is out to nearly the middle of the century. So why the hell did these idiots in Greece decide that they were going to be even greener than the Germans is beyond me. Friggin' crazies. I mean, I just cannot understand why the Greek people are putting up with these dickheads. Really, I mean, it's just outrageous what's happening there. They're sitting on a mountain of gas, which could not only get rid of all their debt, but actually make them quite wealthy. And they're literally living in abject poverty. This is what happens when you've got a dependency oligarchy that doesn't give a shit about the people. This is what happens. They don't give a shit. They just want to maximize how much they can thieve off the population. Yes, I would. I would. Yes, Brie's my favorite of my favorites when it comes to cheeses, that is. Once in a while, you need a friendly reminder what a world with no borders is not about united. It's about a few elites hungry for power. We love to play God. Yeah, exactly. What is happening in Europe is basically an invasion. Um, Europe will be swept away, its culture, its people, its languages, and you'll be all turned into serfs, a melting pot of serfs for the new aristocracy that you will work for, and you'll get your little kibble allocation. Yes, that's the future that they want. That doesn't necessarily mean, and the reason they're trying to break Europe is because most, especially France, most rebellious people are Europeans. Europeans basically do turn the world around and tend to be, if you go to Asia and most other parts of the world, even America, people are far more compliant. Far more, especially Australia, God, they're all sheep down here. You'd think they're all inbred with sheep. That's how bad it is. Same thing in New Zealand, no better. But the Europeans can become quite rebellious. Most revolutions have always started in Europe. So that's where they want to break. They want to break Europe, because if they can break Europe, they can break that, that dynamism of ideas. That's why they targeted Europe. That's why Soros and his gang and the Davos people, they targeted Europe in particular, because they knew if they could bring Europe, if they could change Europe's character, then it'd be much easier for the rest of the world to be changed and controlled. So Europe is let's say, the experimental continent where they are trying to implement aggressively their policies. It's up to the Europeans if they want to put up with this sort of stuff in that regard. Seems the Italians told the elites to go take a hike. The question is, do they have the courage and the conviction to remove themselves from the euro and take some radical steps that they need to? Greece needs to do the same. Needs to go back to the drachma, nationalize its banks, take those criminals out of those banks and put them in jail for destroying the economy and bankrupting the country. They should have never basically, those politicians that were also responsible for bankrolling the banks. The banks should have been allowed to collapse. Simple as that. Reset the system. So, but only the people took the hit, as usual. Yeah, exactly. Human resources. Yes, yes. I call them the human Nazis. Departmental Nazis. Anyway. They will be telling us how to think. Yeah? Yes. I should turn up there. Yeah, I'm thinking about telling them, to do a religious thing on them. I'm just sick and tired of these cockwombles, ass hats. Sounds great. Barra fishing Saturday morning. Oh, that'd be fantastic. Zoom after. Yeah, because I'd be back from the Salamanca market by the afternoon. So in the mid-afternoon, early evening. Yeah, I'll definitely see you then. Just do a few casual jobs, no pressure types of things. Sounds good. World Economic Forum creates conflicts and catastrophes to destabilize, divide populations, and destroy the middle classes. It's exactly it. It's a good agenda, because pretty much if you go back, when the middle classes in the 50s and 60s were the dominant and they were very wealthy and all that, what did they do? The top marginal rates of tax on the rich were much higher. And it meant that they couldn't crowd out the middle class. You could afford a house with 3 years of wages. It also meant that there was free health and education and everything. You didn't have to put it in your own pocket, so you had more disposable income. People I know on conservative sort of say, oh, that's socialism. No. That's there was less regulation back then in the 50s. No, that's using the right economic levers, and that's taxation. Because who creates the wealth? You put a rich man on an island, do you think they create the wealth? It's the people that actually work them. As a manager managing wealth and business, yeah, they should get rewarded. But how much? Trillions, billions, I mean, they take risks. Oh, yeah, so the soldiers should be lavished them with billions of dollars. I mean, I've heard all the excuses and bullshit. The golden years of capitalism were when the middle classes was big and the rich were being taxed at a very high top marginal rate. That's why it was the golden years. Before that and after that, all you had is massive amounts of poorer people. And how did they basically were able to manipulate using the oil crisis? They were able to bring in Reaganomics and Thatcherism, which pretty much they gave people all a credit card and cheap money, which is no different than the current system, which is the food banks and all these government policies to give you kibble and support the social welfare system. I'm against the social welfare system. If you can work and there's work, you go and work. And there's a whole lot of other things people can do out there. You can dig ditches. You can actually fix infrastructure. Governments can use the same sort of money to get people to do a number of hours of work. You should work for all the money you get. Somebody else has to pay the taxes. You should work. That's how it should work anyway. There should be free money so you could sit and play computer games at home and eat your kibble and basically be a good citizen. So I don't believe in that bullshit. Back then in the 1960s, they understood. You want strong middle class, you need to prevent the rich from crowding out the middle class. And you need to actually provide the middle class with greater disposable income. What it does is it also creates greater demand in the domestic economy. That means people have got money to spend far more than they would otherwise, which maintains good demand in the economy. And it only works, this middle class thing only works with cheap energy. You can't do it without cheap energy, because without cheap energy, you have to reduce taxation, because otherwise industry wouldn't be profitable enough. And you also have to reduce, what middle class get. So fundamentally, for middle class to be wealthy and live good lives, you need cheap energy. This is the funny thing. Norway, has got one of the highest living standards. Per capita income is, one of the highest in Europe. And they'll push the woke agenda, but where's most of their wealth coming from? Oil and gas. It tells you everything. Yeah. That's pretty much the level of bullshit and that is told is beyond a joke. The reality is petrochemical products are what make good living standards and provide the middle class with a much better lifestyle. Because as long as the goods and services can be provided cheap enough, you can live good lives. And it's really petrochemical inputs. The rest of it's just politics and bullshit from different sides. I don't subscribe to any of that. As I said, I'm eclectic. Certain policies work. I don't care if they come from the right or left. If they work, they work. They're practical. Yep, they work. And that's what you do. So, I know I tend to make enemies on both sides of the fence, but I don't really care. I think practical approaches are much better. And as far as I'm concerned, everybody from the left and right shout about the elites, but neither of them want to tax them. Like the left wants to tax fossil fuels and the right wants to reduce tax on the rich. And I'm going, okay, so where's it going to come from? Majority of people working for these people create most of the wealth. So, I don't see redistribution as a dirty word, so to speak, but as long as it doesn't actually damage the market, it should be basically that money should come in and actually help invest in infrastructure, in better education, in better health, in better roads, in better bridges and stuff like that. It should be used for productive purposes, for productivity, because the only way is if you grow the pie, you can distribute more. And at the same time, you can maintain living standards. These are the things that people back, the Eisenhowers and the Trumans back in the 50s and 60s, they understood that. Those old conservatives and those old lefties understood that it was this sort of balance. It's the extremes, like the extreme left or extreme right, that take this partisan position. It's all very little government or very big government, where the people back in the 1950s and 60s understood where you needed to have a reasonable sized government and had to be a balance between the two. And it's all bullshit. If you take a look, Britain created an empire because of a big state. Without a big state, they could have never created an empire. The East India Company needed to basically have the military, the British military, to support them so they could have basically their big businesses. It's state. It's basically state capital. It always has been. So don't get people telling you this crap. It's all politics. Your conservatives going, oh, big government, and then they spend the most on the military industrial complex and a whole lot of programs because they want votes. It's just ideological bullshit in order to get votes. It's not true. You have to look beyond just the rhetoric, the practical. What are they practically doing? Okay, what are those people back in the 50s and 60s doing practically? Well, they weren't basically giving free money out. They weren't running like handing out money left, right, and center. What were they doing? You go back to the 70s and on in the 80s and all that, the welfare system grows massively. Well, back there, they will basically say, well, to have a good productive society, you need a good education and a good health system. We're going to provide those to the people so they can actually get skills, so they can get jobs, they can do work, and then they can earn an income so they can support their families. And we're going to take it from the people that makes the most in the society and provide the minimal in terms of work per hours, the wealthy, tax it in order, because at the end of the day, that person, if they were placed in a society like in Africa, they'd be on the side of the road selling, fruit. They'd be a very good salesman, a very good businessman, but that's all they would get. It takes more than just a wealthy person to make a society. It takes all of us, engineers and smart people, people that are educated and all that can create a modern world, and then these people can leverage. So I have no problems with these elites being taxed more and not being able to concentrate so much wealth. But that wealth should not be used just for welfare. That's wrong. It should be basically used to build new roads, build better schools, build better infrastructure, better facilities, those sort of things for the whole of the society, not for a small bunch of, people that are just lazy that want to eat kibble at home. No, I don't believe in welfare payments without basically providing something for it. You're on welfare, I'll have you out there cleaning gutters and cleaning parks and stuff like that. You're going to do a couple of hours for the money that you're getting. You're not going to get it for free. This is bullshit. What happens, and it's no wonder so many young people are saying, "Oh, this is how they get them. You'll own nothing. You'll basically be on kibble, which is cheap, and you'll sit in front of a computer and do things to provide us with income." Yeah. Well, we run a Ponzi scheme through the banking system. It's a joke, the whole thing. That's how they've been running it for some time. So people need to realize that you need to invest in true productive capacities, which is not happening. And that's why the middle class declined in the West, because pretty much the Western leaders turned to speculation, most of their economies, and forced the rest of us into service industries on basically shit wages. That's pretty much what it was. And poor education, so we couldn't even have any mobility anymore within the system. That's why you need a good education, to be able to have mobility. But if you don't have a good education, you're not going to get mobility. And if it costs too much, you can't afford it because you come from a poor family, you're stuck forever, no mobility. That was the Roosevelt and the Truman era. It was pro-middle class. Now they talk about it, all of them, but they don't really do. The practical stuff is they don't want to touch the elites. They want to give them more money, and you less. There's a pie. How much you get of that pie depends on how much you make noise. If you accept the kibble and sitting in front playing computer games and just, and not being responsible, because they say, well, you don't have to do anything for it. Just sit at home, play computer games. And as long as you support the system and you don't become rebellious and you don't threaten the interests of the elites, we don't care, and everybody's disconnected, no connection, no community, no nothing. So just an animal living without purpose. If we look deeper into this, we are just animals living on a new tribal lifestyle. Online communities being conquered and divided by different info. You're fed for the long time. Yes, you can see that. Cutting off in power energy sources equals beginning the third world Europe. Basically, yeah, this is all part of the reset, Harry. Pretty much, John, pretty much. Europe is being brought to its knees. Well, its people are. So, for example, this vegan versus carnivore. One is based solely on ideology and pandering. Other is based on challenging the science and all that. Yes, in some general respects, but veganism is part of a general agenda. You've got veganism, you've got counterculture, you've got wokeism, you've got the environmental mythology. All this sort of stuff has been put together in order to take the young people and redirect their rebellious nature away from being a threat to the elites. That's what they are, the misdirects. These young people are spending so much energy fighting, the vegans fighting the carnivores, these young woke kids fighting against older people like me about environmental stuff, the myths and all that. And so they are using so much energy while their life is declining like that. They can hardly afford to feed themselves. Things are really bad, but there is no resistance. People are just not responding. They're just accepting the reality. Oh, things are just bad. Oh, it's Putin's fault or this. No, it's the system's fault. It's failing you. And it's been brainwashing you to think that it's your fault and somebody else's fault. And it's worked. It's probably this era has been probably the most successful achievements, and wokeism is part of the agenda that the elites are using in order to destroy the middle classes, but also destroy that sort of the culture of where it's people are critical, where they look at things, they go, there's something wrong with the system. People are not saying that anymore. What they're saying is, they're saying, well, no, there's something wrong with my neighbor. There's something wrong with that other person. There was something wrong with my relative. people are being turned into tribal groups to hate each other. But if you direct the anger against other people, you're not directing it upwards, but horizontally. And it's working fantastically for them. How long they can keep it going? I think they miscalculated a lot of things. They're not that smart. And, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. Randall cycle approved. Got to be careful with these characters. Jonathan. Dylan, hey Harry, what do you think the main motivation for all this is? More wealth extraction or something past that? I think it's past that. It's not. Wealth is one thing. You can always, all wealthy people are motivated by wealth and power. But I think that it goes one step beyond that. They want to control our minds. They have realized that for these 10 families or more or less that control the planet, they've realized that for decades and decades, they've had to fight rebellious people that get angry with them. So they realized that, they could use technology over time to control humans. And so what they are doing is dumbing down the population. That's part of the kibble, vegan, and all that. Part of the 1970s and onwards, all this agenda where a lot of university professors and even members of the Academy of Science in a number of countries came out and said, this is just nonsense what these people are saying about saturated fat, about cholesterol and all that. I mean, your cell membranes are made of it. How can it be toxic? This is just absolute nonsense. There's never been a study that's ever proven. It's all associated claptrap that's been adjusted and made up nonsense. But that's not the purpose. If you say something long enough and you use the media to tell people long enough certain stories and narratives, over time, if you've heard it hundreds and hundreds of times, most people accept it as gospel truth. It's very few people that will jump out of that. They'll think that, I'm trying hard, but I'm the failure. I'm failing to comply. I'm taking in too much energy, too many calories, as they call it. So rather than actually saying the system's bullshitting me, they go, I'm failing. And so for a very long time, these people have basically been manipulating people's minds. TV, the most effective tool was the TV. Now it's sort of social media and all these other platforms and stuff like that. People are getting their dopamine hit. And they've become so narcissistic, the young people. They're just focused on, am I getting a like? Oh, is people liking me? Oh, they're not liking me. I'm devastated. And a lot of young people have got a lot of emotional problems at the moment. And it's not only the diet, but also this sort of the way they're being socialized that's creating, as I remember one academic, he's a Greek bloke. He lives in France, Nikos Ligeros. And he really talks about that we humans as social creatures, we need each other, and the way the elites can actually control us is by breaking those bonds, those community bonds, destroying community. And this is what they're doing. They're destroying community. There's another guy that I actually follow. He's a geopolitician as well. And he sort of goes into, into things, Constantinos Philis is his name. And he his sort of approach is that the whole goal of the system now is driven with one focus: the destruction of the middle class in every country, in every advanced country. This is happening globally, not only in Europe, but in most of the advanced countries. The focus is on crippling and destroying the middle classes. And the purpose behind that these people have this agenda, is that by doing that, they can control the society much better. Because the problem is, you've got this long, strong tradition of people running, because he goes back, like he says, in ancient Greece, for instance, the concept of demos, of the people, he said armed people controlling their destiny. He said the reason why they can control us is because we've relinquished this role. He said if we go back when many societies had, like conscript armies or citizen armies or stuff like that, or like they have in Switzerland, it's much harder to control a society in which, a lot of the citizenry have weapons. You can't bring them under control very, very easily. If you try to take away their freedoms, they'll blow you away, so they can defend themselves. And really what they're trying to do is break, as Nico Constantinos, Constantinos Costas, what he says is, if you break the society, you can break, the middle classes, because the middle classes can only exist when citizens come together, when they're united, in a sense. When you take away their ability to come together physically in that regard and connect with each other, you remove that social connection, or the social cohesiveness, or where I feel for my fellow Greek, or my fellow German, or fellow Briton, or fellow Frenchman, or whatever. When you break that, you destroy that, it's much easier to control you, and it's much easier to put other ideas into your mind as well. And so, as he says, they don't want just merely our money, they want our minds. They want to control our minds. They want to tell us what to do, what to eat. They really want to control our minds. And not only that, they also want to control the genetic code. They want to control humans at a fundamental level, and they want to create an underclass which they can control. And they want to use this technology. They've got these sort of post-human ideas and stuff like that, where they will dominate the planet as this new ruling class, which is much better. They view themselves as much better than the rest. And the rest of us should basically be, because they want to control us to such an extent, they want us to be grateful, in a sense. This is how outrageous it is. You can see it from Bill Gates and people like that. They have this arrogant assumption that I'm saving, you should be grateful to be ruled by people like me. This is the sort of mentality these people have, So they're very dangerous people, because they have this sort of thinking, which is a very dangerous thing. What is Bill doing? He's trying to control a lot of the food supply, because they realize controlling energy, food, all these sort of things means that it's very hard for us. They crowd us out. It's what I've been saying for the last couple of decades. All this money printing, what it's made them is very, very wealthy. Before money printing came about, before you had a Federal Reserve, a central bank that could money print, you had really an economy which is much closer to a barter economy. You know, you didn't have this excess massive wealth. It still would have happened. I mean, you still would have had, if you go back to the 1950s and the like banking was like 10% of GDP or even less in some countries, down to 5% of GDP. So banking was very tiny. And because taxes on the rich were very high, and it was manufacturing which was big. The wealthy people, manufacturers, GM, Motors, Ford, Chrysler, all these big companies were the wealthy ones, the manufacturers. The bankers basically were able to tip the system. They were able to, the tech giants and the bankers were able to control the politicians and open up the economy, get rid of, all these high taxes on them, and grow massively because they're like a parasite, parasitic, they grow through debt. And so they've basically grown like a monster that just feeds on its young, on everyone. And it just sucks dry the whole system. And it grows based on debt. Without debt, you can't grow. That's the whole system. That's why they just printed and all that. And by printing money, what happens when you print money is you destroy the middle classes. But you make a small group of people very wealthy because they get a whole lot of a capacity to inflate all the assets, to overinflate them, which means it crowds you out. You can't buy certain things because it's just too expensive, way beyond your wages capacity. Where back in the 50s, 3 years of wages, you could buy a whole house. You can't do that. Now you need 30 to 40 years. It's just impossible. So you've been crowded out. So you don't have a capacity and all that. And then all the user pays because they dropped the taxes from the rich, which meant that there was no money coming in the system. So basically, education had to be degraded, health had to be degraded, all these other things had to be degraded, then you had to put your hand in your pocket and pay for everything, or find a job that would cover some of your health bills or whatever. And as a consequence, your life just went, your living standards just declined slowly over time, with one generation after another, without realizing it. It's only when you actually ask people like, the older people, how was your life then? And they tell you their stories in their life, and how it was less stressful, how they could buy things much easier, they had more disposable income, they had more leisure time, and you go, really? It was quite basic then. You had all this, you know. You got to have conversations with people like that, and then you realize that lived in the 50s and 60s and all that, and you realize very quickly that how much we lost because of that propaganda telling us that, it's your fault things are not working up. No, it was actually the Arabs stopping the oil supply, and then you guys using that as an excuse to blame the people for the crisis, when it was really the oil, the cheap energy coming into the system. And rather than actually addressing the energy issue to provide living standards, you basically told us, give your friends above, your overlords, a tax break and take less of the pie yourself. And it'll trickle down. Well, nothing trickles down. A pie is a pie. If you get less of that, less slice, you get less slice. That's what happens. That's how it works. How much that grows is due to productivity. But if you get less education, because education plays a role in productivity as well, but then again, they don't care because they just exported those jobs anyway elsewhere. So, this is the way it actually played out. And they wanted that to happen because what they want is a global world. Why do you think pretty much you've got people like our current king in England, that supports all these fashionable ideas? It's not accidental. And then it's funny how they will look at they will talk up some of these societies in Asia that are, in some respects, go against their whole ideology. because these are very conservative societies, religious and conservative societies. But then they will say, oh, we need to defend that culture, but the British culture or the Greek culture or whatever, we need to annihilate that. Because really what they want to do is they don't really care about what they want to do is creating a melting pot, and they want to destroy the middle class in Europe. Because if they can bring in a whole lot of people and change the composition and break up these societies, well, there will be no Greek people, there will be no German people, there will be no Italian people, there will be none of that. And all that will be left is a melting pot which they can exploit of cheap labor. They did that in America. In America in the past, they used to have they had in 1920, they had a big immigration from Europe. Then they stopped it to integrate those people, which is what you do. If you're going to be an immigrant society, obviously those societies didn't have a lot of population to start with. And so they had to approach it that way. So they brought populations from areas that had common religion, common, cultural beliefs. So they could easily integrate much easier. But they took big breaks in between to allow that integration to happen. They don't do that now. Now they're saying like Greece taking 2 or 3 million. Well, if you do that, that's replacement population. That's an invasion. That's not immigration. That's an invasion. Greece has got with a low birth rate, about 10 million population. You're bringing in 3 million. Within 2 or 3 decades, there will be no Greeks, or there'll be a very small amount of Greeks, and the rest will have probably immigrated out because they can't live with the new locals because they're so culturally different. So, but they don't care, because if they create a whole lot of wrecked societies around the world, they can still divide and rule and exploit them as cheap labor. So that's how these people think. And as long as they're on kibble, they're not very rebellious or very more controllable with the AIs. This is the sort of thinking these people have. So eat your slop and do your work. Yes, it's a crazy way. These people are full of contradictions, what they say. But it's because they've got a different agenda. It's not because they agree with these sort of ideas. It's because they've got an agenda to break the middle classes and control the populations. They realized they made a big mistake allowing the middle classes to grow back in the 50s and 60s and all that. They realized. By the 70s, they realized, shit, 3 decades we've allowed the middle class to grow and think that they are rulers, not us. It's the same thing that happened in ancient Greece. The middle classes rebelled, knocked off the king, took over, created their own direct democracy. Didn't last very long. Eventually, over time, it was eroded by these elites and destroyed. Well, the middle class societies that we had in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they then had a plan to destroy them. And they've been working very hard and diligently to do that over time. And they found that they could do it quite effectively using money printing to pretty much erode the living standards of slowly the middle class, and appreciate assets to such a level where they could shift a whole lot of wealth. And it worked. So they just basically made a whole lot of mistakes in between, but they were protected by the cheap energy. It sort of masked their errors, because they made many errors, let's put it that way. Yeah, where now all they've got is the woke culture and all these things, and keeping people brainwashed to believe, because as long as people are fighting each other, they're not going to be fighting the people upstairs, pretty much. So it is how it works. It's been doing it for a long time, since the pharaohs. So just remember that. They're pretty good at it. They've been doing it for a very long time. And we've only been able, for our tribal time, we lived around a tribal council and all that sort of stuff, which was sort of like a quasi-direct democracy nearly, for the majority of our existence as a people. It's only with civilization that we had class-based systems and all that, and elites that emerged that tried to control us. And it was only twice in history where the middle classes got powerful enough to take control of the society. That was once in ancient Greece, and then in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where the middle class became powerful enough to control the politics. If you take a look back then, most of the politicians were statesmen, people that came from the middle classes. There wasn't any wealthy people. Now, most of the political class is very wealthy and completely different than the people back then. Most of these people have never done a job in their life, a practical job, like being an engineer or being a police officer or basically being a labourer or an architect or whatever. They've never done a job like that. They've, either come from certain families. Yeah, it's a very different sort of political animal that's at the top of the pile at the moment. And they are integrated with this banking and tech elite. And if you take a look at all these politics, you look at Obama, where did he find all the money on a salary as space, being in academia to some extent, and then being the president? Look at the wealth, how many deals did he had to do with certain people? It doesn't come from nowhere. As I'm saying, these people are part of that whole system, where if you go back to Harry Truman and people like that, they were just simple middle class people that wanted to represent their country and do the best they could, and decent people, had good moral Christian fiber, good religious values. Nowadays, forget it. That's all gone out the window. Most of them are atheistic, sort of demonic arseholes that don't care about anyone other than themselves. So pretty much. Well, the gold standard won't, you don't need a gold standard. See, that's the thing that people don't realize. We had a gold standard up until, quite a few years back, and then we debased it anyway. That's why it failed in the 70s. So it's and it failed even, it was already starting to fail even before, because the problem is that if you've got politicians that undermine that gold standard, it will always fail. It's not enough to have a gold standard. Really, what you need to get is you got to get rid of central bankers. As long as you get rid of central bankers and you bring back sensible banking to the system, saving and loans banks and commercial banks that are involved in investment, and there are people that basically buy corporate bonds or stuff like that, or that are correctly priced and stuff like that. Problem is now you've got all these derivatives, all that should be made illegal. It's just speculation. But you can do that sort of speculation because the money printing is just happening, going like mad. So you can do any sort of speculation. And this is the problem. These people have got more money than sense in some regards. It's obscene what they extract because of the way the system is. You've got to get rid of the central banks is one thing. That will basically eliminate most of the, billionaires. It will basically, you would end up with a society that has got possibly some people that may have a couple of billion, and many others that probably have wealthy people that probably got hundreds of millions or stuff like that. But you would not get this obscene level that we have today. That happens because of this Ponzi scheme called the Fed, or the Bank of England when it comes for the UK or whatever. It's because of their ability to create an environment where asset prices can go through the roof and can crowd everybody else out, bar a small elite that is able to capture that and control that wealth. And that's the problem with the whole system. So it's not a gold standard, so to speak. You don't even need a gold standard. You could have a normal fiat currency, but have it in such a way where it behaved very similar to a gold standard, you know. So the biggest problem is that's why you need. See, even a gold standard is regulation. You know, this is the thing people need to remember. Regulation isn't bad. There is good regulation, and then there's bad regulation. Good regulation is what, you know, something like the gold standard was, something like those laws that controlled the banks not being able to do all this speculative nonsense with people's money. You know, it restricted the money supply. It restricted the misbehavior of banks, those regulations. The only sector you really have to regulate is the banking system. Everything else doesn't need to be regulated to the same extent, except environmental stuff like that, because you don't want people polluting in the waterways or stuff like that. Those sort of areas, because it affects us, our health, you know. So you need that sort of stuff. And you need, but for a lot of the other stuff, that there's a lot of red tape, that is more to keep other small businesses out of the market so they can protect monopolies of other people. You know, the patent system with patents, it means that if I've got a patent, I can have it forever and I can make a few adjustments and then reissue it continuously, and I can prevent others from being able to use those ideas. So I can over and over again and stuff like that. And that's wrong. You know, or restrict intellectual pursuits and innovation. It actually undermines innovation and all that. It's a lot of these things which allow certain people to make a horrendous amount, you know, when their research would have never got to that stage without the prior stuff that came before them, that they based their ability, if you know what I mean. In many cases, most of the, if you take a look, who actually paid for most of the research, even for the COVID jabs, it was the government. Most research is paid by the government, and these guys walk away with all, you know, all the benefits. It's a joke. That's the problem, you know, where the public gets nada. It's corrupt as, I mean, it's like certain people, even in the some of these committees that approve drugs and whatever else in the US and elsewhere, and they get kickbacks, and also they get royalties. I mean, what? You get paid by the government to do a job, and you get paid research money by the government to do that sort of stuff. You know, why are you getting royalties? The government should, because they've actually allocated the money. This is how corrupt the whole system has become. You know, the rest of us, when we make an innovation in a business, we get nothing. The business just gets it. It's a joke. The whole system is so corrupted. It's beyond a joke. Some people believe the world is run by psychopaths. Perhaps it's an obsessive ideology that they are superior and should possess all commodities. Who knows? But then, I guess. Well, I wouldn't say all of them are psychopaths. Probably some are, but you know, there are even poor people that are psychopaths. So you know, they would have a percentage of people within their ranks. Let's put it that way. I mean, even I've got one of those sort of genes. Maybe that's why I was an asshole in the past. Actually, riboflavin corrects it. I haven't done the video yet about it. I should do the video, but riboflavin does correct it. So eating a species-appropriate diet actually makes you more empathetic. It makes you a better person. Probably explains why I've become a better person. So I don't have both. I just have one. I'm a halfway house, halfway loony. Yes, but you're not your genes. You're not what your genes. It's whether they get expressed. You can downregulate them. Eat a species appropriate diet. Become a better person, rather than a deranged vagoon. Probably those deranged vagoons have probably got the same gene, but I think most Greeks have that gene, probably because they've been fighting amongst themselves for so many years. It's the most ruthless survive. Makes sense why they're so. Anyway, when it comes to warfare, George, how are you, mate? US minutes wage doubled and tripled from. That's piss poor. I mean, my nephew on minimum wage gets about $21 an hour in Australia. And I'm on multiple times that. God, even double that I wouldn't work for. Let me put it that way. So that just explains how low US has got. Pretty low. As a tradesman, our contract got a 6% rise over 3 years. This just drove us closer to lower class and erodes the middle class. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's all it is. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I got my nephew, who was at the time, how old? I think he was 17 at the time, and I got him a job, and he was being paid $17.50 an hour, and that was junior rates. Once you get over 18, you're on 21. I think it's 21 or something like that, the minimum in Australia. So, yeah, America's really, really low, and it's bullshit that it doesn't make jobs. I can't remember which state in America that actually took the minimum wage up to $15 an hour, and actually their unemployment rate came down and their jobs increased. It's actually been research in this. People at the lower end spend most of their money locally, which means that if you pay people more at a local level, they'll spend more money at a local level. And it actually increased a number of small businesses. Small businesses depend on a stronger middle class. That's why back in the 50s and 60s, there were strong middle classes and a lot of small businesses. Small businesses have collapsed. I mean, I think in some countries, in Western countries, it's collapsed. The growth of small business collapsed something like close to 80 to 90%, because to get into it, it's very hard nowadays. And we're not talking about small business people like Bill Gates. When he started, he wasn't a small business. His family was wealthy. He just bullshits about that. I mean, he went and bought DOS from a guy up in Seattle for about 50 grand. And this was back in the 70s. 50 grand was like $500,000 or more. That's not, just spare change from a middle-class family. That's from a wealthy family. Here you go, son, go and buy the program, without even knowing whether it's going to be successful or not. And his mother, I think his mother knew one of the senior managers in IBM. That's why he was able to go in there and do a cozy deal with them. So, I mean, these people just bullshit. Oh, I did it so hard. Yeah, whatever. You wouldn't know hard if it hit you in the head. Interest rates for homes went up to 6.5. It's much more reasonable to rent a house instead of buy. Even apartment rent approximately $500 a month the last year. Yeah, look, it's for a lot of people, middle class people, it's going to be very hard to, you may have to make a choice. If you've got a reasonable job, to say, well, at least I can enjoy some holidays and stuff like that. Otherwise, if you're locked into paying for an overinflated piece of property, and the way things are going at the moment is, they've really messed it up so bad, the elites, we're actually seeing at the moment a collapse in all asset classes. It's coming a bit quicker than I thought. Because remember years ago, a couple of years back, I was saying to you guys, 2025 was my prediction of a big collapse. And I'd actually said to my brother Sean at the time, I said, this was back, I was in Bali in 2006, and I said to him, we're going to have a crisis next year to 2000. Well, I said 2008. It did start in 2007, but it really hit in 2008. And we'll talk about it. So I said, look, they'll probably reinflate this one. And exactly what they did, the Fed reinflated the whole bubble. And so it wasn't as severe, as a 1929. But I said, based on the sort of the money printing that's been happening in the system, the rate of it, I predicted that by 2025, we would have the biggest collapse in all equity classes across the board. I sent him an email in 2010. So I said, just to reminded him yesterday. He's in Melbourne, actually. And I said to him, but COVID, who would have thought about COVID and the destruction of the supply chain and, the massive money printing. I mean, 2 years they printed money that I expected for them to print over the next 5 years. In just 1 year nearly, they printed that amount. And I'm going, they just went berserk. So it actually is coming in early, the 3 years much earlier than what I thought would happen. So things are looking pretty precarious. I'm sort of next month, maybe or early next year. It's either going to be later this year at some point, could be next month or early next year. But I can see a massive, somewhere it's going to come undone. Already there's been a bit of a contraction in the British economy, which means that some fund in Britain has actually collapsed. But the media is saying nothing. So, because when you've got a correction, when you get a correction between 4 to 6%, it really, it's really telling you that, and that happens really all of a sudden, it really is telling you that somebody's gone by the wayside. So it's interesting. Be interesting to know who, but it seems the media now is far more controlled than in the past. You're not going to get anything from them. And that's the scary thing until you have quite systemic collapse, more entities falling apart, and then they can't hide it anymore. So I say to people, if you can get out of your current situation, get out of it. So somebody may have, let's say, a large home, by selling it and getting into something smaller, or renting for a while and putting it aside and waiting for a bit of a collapse in equities and then buying back in. They may buy back in, debt free is one thing. Other people, depending on the country, there's going to be variations, a bit of gold, a bit of silver, just for a rainy day is probably not a bad idea. Things like that, you really have to consider the future. Things aren't going to be the way they were. They've printed shitloads of money, and they've destroyed the energy supply system and the general supply. It's just horrendous how friggin' incompetent these people have been. It's just, this is not a controlled crisis. This is a systemic crisis that they've created from their poor management. And that's what scares me the most, because something that's controlled, you can recover from. Something that's systemic and a whole lot of asset classes are going by the wayside. It's Well, it's not going to solve Italy's problems, but I can understand why the people are just frustrated and voted that way. Um, I don't think she's an evil person or anything like that. At the end of the day, the stuff that she's saying is what I agree with. That she says I'm Italian, and I could express the same ideas. I'm Greek. You know, I'm a Christian, a person of faith. I've got a culture, and I don't want to be swept away just because some people don't think it's fashionable. So I can sympathise with some of the language, and pretty much these groupings or their ideologies. I don't even use the words anymore, like right, left, and stuff like that, because pretty much the left and right in their traditional sense don't exist anymore. I mean, but take a look at Le Pen, take a look at her. Most of the people are have a very they are compared to the past of people of similar politics. uh, she's very reasonable. She sounds more like somebody coming from the old centre left in some regards. So, or centre right. She doesn't come across to me like somebody in some policies and other policies a bit more, very eclectic in between the centre, centrist in some regards. So it doesn't come to me out as something vile or, let's go out there and knock people off and invade people and all that, like some of these groupings may have done in the past. So these people are just reasonable, saying we need to defend our way of life that's being destroyed by these elites and the current political class of Europe and the current elites of Europe. So I can understand where she's coming from. Whether she's going to have enough support to be able to push through the type of reforms that are required to fix Italy, I doubt it. It's really hard within the European Union. It's a lot of constraints. The only way is for European leaders, as I said earlier, they need to basically force a change at the centre. That means European politicians from the different countries need to get together and say, we're not going to endorse anything from now on unless we see major reforms in the way the center of Europe works. And if that was to happen, then there may be a possibility to arrest, the current crisis to an extent. I think we're far too gone now. There's going to be some blowback and there's going to be some damage that's going to happen. It's just inevitable where, things have just gone too far in terms of, you know, the the mismanagement. Somebody's going to, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to take a hit. Somebody needs to. That's the reality. So even if you wanted to, let's say, bring back fossil fuels and cheap energy, you couldn't do it. It takes a number of years of investment. You just can't turn it around that fast. This is the problem. You know, the last, what is it now? 7 years of underinvestment. You can't reverse 7 years of lack of sufficient exploration and underinvestment in petrochemical products. You just can't do it. It's not possible. You know, it takes a couple of years. I see this as basically a big, massive decline and a large impoverishment of a lot of Western societies that have followed the Green New Deal woke agenda, and they're going to pay for it severely with a massive reduction in living standards in the next decade. And whether they've got the balls to basically stand up to these elites and change the direction of their society, Europe, or their societies, is hard to say at this point. Most of the young people are too weak. Basically, they're just too weak. the piss weak. I mean, my old man, 87, could scare one away. They're just weak. Let alone, I mean, they're more likely to put a dress on and go out and protest with a dress on than basically join the military or, or go to a protest against the real enemies. So I just can't see it. Why do people get elected of this sort in Italy or places like that? Well, you've got an aging population. It's mainly middle-aged people and older people that voted for these people, but they're dying out. The younger people are voting for all the woke parties. And waving the Davos flag. This is the problem. They've infiltrated the education system and they have brainwashed the young. They've captured the young, the most rebellious people. This is what is most scary. People out there that have got families and got kids, you need to take your kids aside and basically start teaching them some of this stuff and explaining what's happening, because they need to start talking amongst their friends. And, yes, it may be uncomfortable, but you know what? If you don't do it, we'll lose this coming generation, and we'll all be comprehensively effed. So keep that in mind. Harry, this stream needs to be private. Hello. Also, low interest rates, hyperinflation is stealing the savings and wealth now. Waiting for petrodollar system to collapse. Yes. Yes. With some of the stuff that Biden's doing, he's really helping it along, isn't he? God. Anyway. Crazy stuff are happening. Well, that's the thing. Servicing debts is a problem for many people, even investors, small investors, and stuff like that. So there's no easy options out there currently. So that's the problem. There are no easy options. I mean, even some of my family have got properties and stuff like that. So there's no easy options, put it that way. Very much so. Yeah, it's obscene what they've been able to accumulate. Yeah. I mean, I remember my father used to be a boilermaker welder, and he was able to buy himself a house, a shop, which had a house on top as well, which we rented out while we lived in the other house. And then we moved in and worked the shop when Jimmy Geopolitics actually decided to leave and gave us and said, George, why don't you take it over? And Dad then resigned from his boilermaker welding job. I'm trying to remember the name. Mechanical Works or Service. I can't remember. It's in Murray Street, across from where the RACTs. They used to be in the back there, but there's actually another company there that sells blinds or stuff like that. In the back, there's a little laneway. Right at the back, there's this warehouse type thing. There used to be a factory in there. Dad used to do all the transformers, all those green transformers you see around the Hobart area. Most of those Dad did. So, yeah, mechanical service, I think it was. And then we got into business, small business. We did quite well out of that. Thankfully, Jimmy Geopolitics decided to teach my father how to run a small business, teach him about cash flow, teach him about, how to manage inventory, how to, do proper stock take, and how to do projections and all this sort of stuff. So taught him the ins and outs of so yeah, I don't think my father would have been that successful without that other person. So, but at least he was really nice that his family wanted to go back to Melbourne. They didn't want to stay in Hobart. They had relatives back there, so his wife was nagging him to go back. But he was a really pretty good businessman, Jimmy Geopolitics. But actually, Dad ran the business even better than him in the end. So the student ended up way better in some regards. We used to have people waiting outside in lines. It's incredible. God, back in the 70s, I was a young kid. Anyway, g'day, Lukey. You've probably just popped out of bed. I have to admit, it feels good when people agree with you. Dopamine kicks in real for me right now. Take your kibble in TL. How does that affect you? Yeah, well, it's even those sort of stuff, they're not underpinned by anything. That's why it's sort of going, even that's going pear-shaped. You need energy as well to run Bitcoin or to run those sort of things. And energy is becoming expensive. It's harder to mine and make money on that. So, yes, without cheap energy, most things become expensive, most activities. And it doesn't underpin from anything. It's just basically belief, no different than a fiat currency. But at least a fiat currency is underpinned by some national economy with some assets and stuff like that. So, but that doesn't guarantee you'll redeem any of that stuff if the mismanagement is too severe either. Yes. Anyway. Fluffy Rainbows, how are you? Yes. I sort of looked at the Nord Stream thing and sort of discussed that, and then we've got into other things now about, the way of the world in that regard. Well, the way they're going about it's going to be very easy. Already there's a decline in the population. So, yes, them and the AIs will inherit the world, apparently. But they don't have to put in much of an effort at the moment. Our populations globally are in decline. That's the reality. So even in places like Bangladesh, it's about just slightly over 2. So even there, even in some developing countries, it's going backwards. It's probably all the kibble, the chemicals, and all the other crap that's damaging the birth rates as well. So there's a lot of factors. Yes, the kibble culture of ancient Egypt. When they went back to camel's milk and all that, that's when their population grew again. When they went back to those sort of eating styles. Also think of the film Matrix. You guys have got great imaginations. Well, no fiat currency is real money. But the funny thing is, everybody's rushing back into the US dollar at the moment, and all the other currencies are being gutted. Pretty much. I know the Japanese have basically been using the banks in Sweden. I think Sweden. That's right. They're using the Sweden's to basically push to dump US bonds in the Hong Kong market. Now the Japanese are sort of saying, "Oh, they got caught out doing it," or well, some commentators are basically saying that they're doing it, And now they're sort of saying, well, we need to support to the yen, so that we're going to do a bit as well. So they're doing some secretly, well, semi-secretly, through Sweden and Hong Kong, and the other part is being done, directly through the Tokyo, markets. So yes, China's under a bit of pressure. China seems to be, the strategy from China is that they're fearful. What the Chinese have done is they've shifted 50% of their trade of what now is with Southeast Asia. So 50 is with the US and Europe, and 50 with Southeast Asia. They're fearing that Southeast Asia could have a credit crunch like in the 90s. So what the Chinese are starting to do is buy US bonds off, basically what they're doing is they're encouraging the Southeast Asians to take up the yuan, which is also another reserve currency within the world trade system. So what they've done is they're encouraging them to take out yuan and dump US bonds. One that ties them then to the Chinese market, but at the same time, it also means that these Southeast Asian countries are less vulnerable to a liquidity squeeze from the US, which is raising interest rates and sucking in money like there's no tomorrow back into the US economy. So that's really what's happening on that front. But at the same time, it's actually just making the US very uncompetitive as well. So, and and there are risks in that as well. Because it's usually being bought up by a lot of it. I've noticed the Fed buying in the secondary markets and elsewhere. So, yeah, let's say there's a question mark on what's happening on that regard anyway. So it's quite interesting what China's doing. They hold about, together with Japan, they hold about 30% of US foreign treasuries. So it's going to be interesting how they play it from here. But they're offering Southeast Asian countries yuan, so doing some swap deals. I'm not sure how that's going to play out at this stage, but it's interesting. Let's put it that way. So still waiting to see. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of transparency, and mostly I'm just talking to some people in the finance areas and all that, and some of them are sort of telling me that there is a bit of movement on that front, but they don't know how much and what the actual central banks of those countries are doing with the Chinese central bank either. So it's really at the moment hazy. So there is some activity there, but exactly, I don't know enough at this moment. I'm trying to find out, but I'm still a bit in the dark as well on that front. But it's quite interesting what they're doing. Raymond, how are you? Yes, I decided to give you guys a bit of a treat. So, oh, Charles, yeah, yes, very scary. The first woke king. Wonderful. In Asia, we care about what we can put in our mouths day by day, not this first world propaganda BS or through social media. Is slowly creeping in, like Japan, Korea, etc. Yes, it is. It definitely is. So the biggest issue is liquidity at the moment for Southeast Asia. But it seems that, and this is the risk for the Americans, is that if the Chinese are able to replace their liquidity that these economies require in Southeast Asia, it means that the US will lose leverage over these countries, and these countries will become economically satellites of China. So it's interesting. Remember a couple of, what was it? Was about a year ago, I think it was, that I actually mentioned to you guys that how the Bank of Japan and the Bank of China were making cozy little deals about um, the US bond market, if you remember back then. Yes. There seems to be a bit more activity on that front as well at the moment. But I was quite surprised when I found out that they were using Sweden, Hong Kong, to dump some US treasuries and bonds. And now there seems to, they haven't officially started. There's a bit like they're putting the feelers out. There's been no response from Washington. So it's going to be interesting to see whether next week the Japanese start, offloading or not, or whether they'll use these back doors through Sweden and Hong Kong rather than go directly through the Tokyo markets. It's going to be interesting to see what, how Japan plays it from here, and also how China plays it. I know that they're definitely going to try and put in some yuan liquidity directly into Southeast Asia because they need that. That's half their foreign trade, so they can't allow that to falter in any regards. So I suspect China will move in a big way in Southeast Asia. Yeah, but I don't know how the US is going to react with all this sort of, because there's a lot of central banks doing all sorts of things. The only central banks that don't seem to know what they're doing is the European ones, excluding the Bank of England, which seems to be trying to tighten while the government's basically all over the place and doesn't have a policy at all, which really is sending out the wrong messages, and making people a bit wary of, of the economic state in the UK at the moment. So, yeah. So that's probably the only central bank that's got their act slightly together. The US is tightening like mad, and I think it's because they printed so many trillions through the COVID that pretty much they realized they really overstepped the mark, and they're trying to overcorrect. And they're doing this overcorrection as well because they're trying to suck in liquidity, and the reason for that is to support the old petrodollar, because it's already been sliding close to the 50% in its use for international transactions, and I think that's another part of the strategy. It'll hit a lot of Americans as a consequence. Many of the items, because a lot of them come from a disrupted supply chain, come from Asia, which will mean that some of things are going to become quite cheap, and other things are going to become quite expensive. So housing, energy, all that's going to become more expensive. Certain trinkets, you could say, entertainment stuff and all that's going to become cheaper, in a sense. But food's going to become more expensive as well. So I think already the prices have risen quite dramatic in the US as well, food prices, and definitely in Europe, obviously. But as I think Jonathan said earlier, you can still find some good deals if you look hard enough. So that as well. G'day, Dave. Yes, it is. Yes. You're sleepy. You're sleepy. This is Sunday, Dave. This is Sunday. Not working on you? Okay. Good to have you here, mate. No, they don't. They definitely don't. Yes. Yes. There is paper to undertake transactions, which is basically an IOU in a sense. So facilitates transactions in that regard. Yes. But really, as I've always said, money is really the expression of the energy potentiality in a system. It's really reflects what capacity any system has. And so its value is reflective of that. The society declines because it's too costly to produce certain things, or many other things interrelated. So it's something that is really tied to that society, its economics. It's not, most people view it as just an exchange thing. That's currency. You know, currency is sort of an exchange thing. It's just a means of exchange, basically. What we get paid in, so to speak. Lockdowns didn't exactly help. No, they didn't. They really stuffed up large parts. Oh, that was the genetics. Yeah, I'm probably that far back. Yeah, I'm not surprised. G'day, Llama. You should probably address those that are prot- protesting, just fringe minority ready to be subverted and labelled an enemy of the state. Plus, they are not much against water cannons. Yes, yes, yes. I need to get back to you as well. I haven't read your recent email, so I'll send you an email as well. Try and do that other, that other private Zoom thing that we've got. Try and get a get together. Maybe this weekend I'll try and get something done so we can go through some of your ideas and that. Okay, and then so we can work out some video stuff. Something else, but I can't remember now. If it comes to me, I'll say something. Okay, Sandra, the mainstream media in the US is criminal. Oh, they have been for a very long time, my dear. They have been for a very, very long time. They are far worse now than they ever were in the past. I mean, nowadays it's just, in the past, they omitted things, or they misrepresented things, or slightly skewed the truth, or stuff like that. Now they're just outright lying. It's really bad. It's what can one say? You know, it's just they've become a tool of the establishment. There's no media independence anymore. Really, you can't rely on anything. It's usually, I talk to a number of people around the place, and try and sometimes email certain people and try and chat to find out what's happening in this area. I heard this. Is that true, or is that bullshit? To try and find out things that are happening around the world, because it's pretty much pretty bad in that regard. Um, I mean, as I said, there was I think it was, what was it, 4 point something percent or whatever in Britain, sort of a correction. And that would have meant that some fund went bust, but we never heard anything about it. There's a lot of things that they're hiding from us at the moment because they mismanage things so badly, and things are in a systemic crisis at the moment. This is not to the .com or 2008 or anything like that. This is the big one. This is sort of 1929 type thing. All asset classes are being affected, everything. And the level of friction at the moment is just horrendous globally. And the political class at the moment are just juvenile. I mean, they are hopeless. Current British Prime Minister is useless. The current American president is useless. You've got people that do not have the will or the capacity or the knowledge how to sort things out. And maybe they've left it for too late. There's a lot of things that we don't know, but some of the stuff that I'm hearing and noticing and looking at some of the figures, it's just frightening. I mean, I look at some of the energy requirements for the next 3 years, and then the exploration, and also what's stored. So there's facilities around Europe and a few other places where you've got gas being stored, and there is a certain amount. The problem is the amount required with the amount that's in storage or may be available. Iran may be able to increase slightly, Qatar slightly, but there's still going to be a massive shortfall. Anything between 20 to 30%. I mean, that's a lot. It's, remember, Greece contracted by its economy by well over 30 odd percent. Russia by 40 odd percent back in the Soviet Union era in the 90s. 30 odd percent, even if it's 20, 25% or something like that, that is massive contraction within your own economy. That's not, like a general crisis where there's 5% or 10%, 5 or 7% or something like that, because usually that's what even the most severest crisis. When a third of your economy or a quarter of your economy to a third goes haywire, you're in sort of 1920s, 29 sort of level of crisis. If 50% goes, well, that's a bit like Zimbabwe, like Raymond is talking about. That's when you got a just complete collapse of the society. When you're at those sort of levels. We talk about a crisis like, the .com and all that, a couple of percentages. That's what those crises were. When you're talking about 20 to 30%, you're talking about a complete implosion of the society. It's horrendous, to say the least. And nobody's saying anything. Nobody's preparing the population. And you've got a whole lot of idiots in Europe and elsewhere just running around with like chooks with their head cut off with no ideas. It doesn't even seem like they have an urgency. That's the most scary thing. There's no urgency. They should be having back-to-back, get-togethers to discuss strategies, how to do things, how to sort things out. I mean, the funny thing is, part of the US administration is doing more to help Europe out with sending their their State Department type representatives to different certain countries to try to shore up energy for the West. I mean, Europe is in a complete gridlock. It's like you see those animals in the middle of a road and the headlights hit them and they're stunned and they're just looking at the headlights like that. That's Europe at the moment. They're just like, you know, they really don't know what to do. It's scary. Damn scary. Yes, like they're doing in, they're gonna start doing in Canada, but they're doing it in the Netherlands. Yep, exactly. Yes, those evil farmers need to be sorted. Yes. They just provide all the food for us to keep us in our super cities. Yeah, pretty much he did. And it's in shallow waters, which would be very hard for the Russians to get there and do it. And why would they do it? I mean, they want Europe to be dependent on them even after the war. They do not want to destroy their own infrastructure. Cost billions. People don't destroy their own infrastructure. The Russians have been very careful not to damage pipelines in the Ukraine because they know they'll need them later on to basically send gas through those pipelines. So they're not going to destroy their own stuff. This is quite clearly, the only country that's got the biggest benefit or interest in this is the US. Now, I don't know whether the US special forces did it or whether the British SAS or their frogmen did it. Could have been sort of privately done, or there's always that possibility. But these explosions in shallow waters very close to Swedish territory, yeah, just stinks. Especially when the Swedes come out and say, "Oh, it wasn't within our territorial bounds; it was in our exclusive economic zone." And you go, "What?" I mean, somebody doing it in your violating your exclusive your territory obviously is a much more egregious violation. But somebody destroying infrastructure within your exclusive economic zone is also an act of war. It would be considered an act of war under normal circumstances. So that this sort of blasé, oh well, we don't know. It's not that important. It's not really in our own territorial waters. It's like, we don't want to be associated with it. It's like they're saying we don't want to be associated with it. I'm going, okay. So either you know something or you suspect something. But it's definitely got his deranged paws on it. Let's put it that way. And if he's not directly involved, there may be part of the deep state that are using people, but I still suspect that he probably is. He's well connected with the deep state in the US. So, well, the younger generation are more interested in putting the men are more interested in putting skirts and virtual signaling and telling us oldies how evil we are that we destroyed their planet by putting carbon out. So that's the sort of situation that it is. And they've been brainwashed now for a number of decades through the education system very effectively. Unfortunately, a lot of us that were warning about this and we're still warning but not being listened to. And things are not going in the right direction. That's why the clowns so badly want to disarm Americans, because, as I said, if there's one society that could go that way, is the US. No other society of the developed countries. So because the polarization in the US is quite extreme at the moment. Where in Europe, a lot of the young kids have been so brainwashed by the green agenda to such a level. I'm, it's probably going to be grandmas and impoverished middle class, middle aged people that are going to come out in the streets. It won't be the youth of Europe. That's how bad it is in Europe. So, yeah, exactly. The French, as I said, most things happen in France. Most of the sort of rebelliousness of Europe is really always, most trends do start in France. So, if there's any hope for the continent of Europe, it's France. So, we'll see how it all plays out. Look, I don't, I don't know, whether she is or she isn't in that regard. Some of the views that she's got are definitely not the ones being promoted by either the Rockefellers or Soros or any of those sort of groups. So it's, and the Rockefellers aren't the most wealthiest people anyway. They sort of diluted their wealth a long time ago to their children and grandchildren and all that. So, or some of the families together and sort of use their money together as a group. Most of the groups have been broken up and sort of moved to different countries. They've migrated. So they're not as effective as they used to be in the past. Let's put it that way. There's now a whole lot of other people that are just as wealthy or even wealthier than they are. So, as I said, there's about 10 odd families, a number of them in the US and a couple of them in Europe and a few other places, but that's about it, that sort of control most of the resources of the planet. But look, I've heard certain things, but even if she wasn't, as I said earlier, Scotty, I don't think she can do much until. So the problem is, it's the euro. Europeans are locked in a currency union, which gives them no ability to control. They don't have a central bank of their own. They don't have their own currency, which they can devalue or do things with. And the other thing is they've underinvested in energy, like Greece. The funny thing is little Cyprus there, everybody is the quiet achiever. It's the only bloody country in Europe that actually bucked the trend and said, "No, we don't care what the others are doing. We're going to follow our own course." The only ones that actually, as a proportion, as a population, they've actually done more to bring in new energy, from the gas fields and all that, than any other, even under duress from Erdogan's threats and a number of others. They've just ignored them and just ploughed on and just built their big gas reserves and all that, which has been fantastic. If just Greece and others would have done the same in Southern Europe, maybe Europe would have been slightly in a better position and not listen to the Germans and and develop those resources. Europe would have acquired something better. But the problem is, you had these Davos people pushing Germany and Russia together and encouraging the complete destruction of the middle classes in Europe. That's the whole thing, So the last thing they wanted is the poor South to become wealthy and not have to basically be controlled by the Davos crowd anymore. This is the whole thing. It's like the windmills and solar farms are like a sort of a way of impoverishing the middle class, is the way I sort of view those things. And doing it with a smile on our faces. It's ridiculous. Yeah, they did the smart thing. So, yeah, other countries should have done the same thing, because these institutions are pushing this agenda. That's the problem. Yes, there is. There are plenty of models in the past. Some in China as well. Yeah, I think this is what you're talking about, is it? Anyway, give us a location. Tell me where it is. Uh, I was telling people to buy lithium years ago, before the lithium craze took over. Yes, yes. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's quite a bit of investment in Western Australia on lithium at the moment. But yes. The problem is, there's not enough copper. There's not enough boron. There's a couple of and some other materials as well. There's actually not enough. Even if you wanted to electrify the whole economy, you couldn't. You know, because there's just not enough of some of these materials required in the products, unless some of the technology changes, or some of the materials used change. So keep that in mind. Another thing is platinum. Actually, out of the Perth Mint, you can buy gold, silver, and platinum. There's other things to invest in. But they're not really an investment. It's sort of a putting 20% of your assets in something that will hold its value. And so when things do go, if they go as bad as potentially, then you've protected part of your assets. So you've lost on this part. You may have lost like 50% on this part, and that the other part may have appreciated by a couple of times over, which sort of nullifies nearly the losses. Anyway, I'm not saying to people that this is not an investment show. It's not basically financial advice. All I'm saying is that these are options that people can take, especially in a systemic crisis as we're going through at the moment. That's all I'll say. How should one determine their protein intake for maximum muscle growth when bodybuilding? Well, this is my personal opinion, is 4 grams per kilo of body weight. And that would be, if it's 4 grams per kilo, that would be 1.82 grams per, so 1.82 grams per pound would be the equivalent. So some people may say that is quite a lot, but sand people at Kalahari, that's the sort of average. So if you're doing that amount and exercise and stuff like that, you should get enough leucine. I'd definitely still put a bit of taurine in there because we do want to slightly lower myostatin and amplify the effects of leucine. So it's still very important to do that. I know many bodybuilders don't think about taurine in that regard. That's because they're ignorant about the research, and also it is an amino transporter. So it's important to get more through, shuttled in, and then amplifying the effects of protein synthesis. Alex, well, the current crop don't. There have been in the past people that did give a shit, to some extent. In past eras, there were the occasional one here or there, but the current crop, none of them. They're all part of a, they get schooled. They never work. They've never worked in their life. They get schooled right out of university into these, so they're all interconnected. They know each other, and it's just like a little club. So the political class today is completely a different animal than what it was even a couple of decades ago. So, yeah. And they're all Davos kids. Yes, they're all Davos, good Davos kids, good global citizens. Yes, by the good people from Davos, Lama. Yes, they were well treated. Yeah, it's not looking good, especially in Europe. Things are pretty bad. I mean, if you can find like dry meats or cured meats or stuff like that, you can store for some time. Do buy some of that sort of stuff, and consider like choline supplementation and taurine supplementation and some sort of multivitamin stuff like that. It's not something that I usually recommend these things for healthy carnivores, but currently the way the situation is, you just may need to have a few things lying around to help you through. And it's going to get worse in the next 5 years before it gets any better. So it's going to be quite a systemic crisis in the next 5 years, over the next 5 years, and then it'll be a decade long, unfortunately, and then it'll start to recover. So, yeah, how bad it's going to get, don't know, guys. I don't know. That's like the $1 million question. I don't know. But when you've got the potential for a massive shortfall in terms of energy, we're talking about potentially a massive contraction. Northern Europe, which is even more dependent on energies, it will actually suffer worse. So the industrial areas will suffer worse than the least industrial areas. So places like Greece that is more commodity based are actually going to be doing a bit better. That's the funny thing about it. Where places like Germany that have got a lot of industrial, most of their economy is built around light, medium, and heavy industry. Without energy, just doesn't work, doesn't make money, doesn't keep people employed. So, yeah, things could really become hairy. I don't really care what studies say, Jonathan, personally. I look at some of the ancestral stuff and all that, and my personal recommendation is, you know, I basically do about 2.2 grams per day. And if people really want to, they really need to get up to about three to four, is my personal opinion on that regard. And I look at some of the ancestral sort of roots on that. Especially when you're not doing any carbs, or you're just doing fat and protein. But you can do less. You can do 2.2, which is what I do. But you can do potentially up to 3 to 4. I know the Sand people of the Kalahari, on average, some of them are consuming up to 4 grams. That was based on Cordain's work quite a few years back. I did a video with Bart on that. It's on the Odyssey, that other place. So talk about government care about their people. Don't even let me start about breaking families, own your kids, destroy communities, plus small business, experiment on people, etc. Us is a joke. Yes, very much. Very much. That's exactly true, Fatty Finn. Well said. That they are. You just have to take a look at, the way they behave. Very dangerous. Yeah, I personally don't fear protein. As long as there's no sugar in the system, exogenous sugar, your insulin to glucagon should be 1.3. Maybe it may shift a bit. If you're getting over 2.5 grams, it may shift to about 1.5 insulin to glucagon ratio. But the insulin to glucagon ratio for a pure potato, which doesn't really raise, doesn't engage the Randall cycle, doesn't really raise insulin that much, or IGF-1, or, is basically 4 to 1. So it's still higher. We need insulin signaling. We don't need an over amplification. We don't need insulin to be screaming. Small amount of insulin is just all you need for the signaling. It's the signaling that actually is telling the cell to do this with this material, to open up, to take in glucose, or to, take those aminos and drive them in to protein synthesis. So it actually sends a signal and goes, okay, I want you to produce a whole lot of proteins. I also want you, through the Krebs cycle, to produce a number of amino acids, so by the essential amino acids, and then through then transcript certain proteins, and then take that stuff, those aminos, as building blocks and build certain structures. So that's the sort of, what it actually ends up doing. It's just, I think people are confused about, there's a difference between signaling of hormones and all that, and a difference between derangement of hormones. which comes about because of contraindicated sort of behaviors and stuff like that. And this is where a lot of athletes, don't understand the biochemistry or physiology properly, the signaling role that hormones play, and end up thinking, oh, I can take insulin or this or that, and end up causing themselves health problems, thinking that will actually make things better. And you go, no, because if the old bodybuilders needed this when they can build just as good physiques, they wouldn't have had those physiques. You just, yeah. And these sort of funny growths that they get is overexpression in certain parts of the body, which is really problematic and does create some issues in itself, that regard. I mean, you can actually see if you pump insulin in a certain part of your body, like let's say around your stomach, you can actually end up with like certain growths happening, sort of strange growths. So you got to be very careful using this sort of stuff. You shouldn't be using it at all. Leucine does a good enough job in signaling the right hormones to activate in the right way, in the right amount, in a measured way, to achieve these things. Over amplifying these things doesn't increase the protein synthesis. That's what usually happens in a Randall cycle activated state, where you're having over signaling and pushing growth pathways. And we're not talking about the muscle protein synthesis growth pathways here. We're talking about the fat deposition pathways, adding more adiposity, more fat on your body. So, yeah. Because it's trying to cope with excesses, and it needs to store it somewhere. That's what the fat cells are for. And so did Newland in, she's a dodgy character. She's really a dodgy character. She's been involved in the Iraq War. She's involved in a whole lot of things. She's one of those people from the State Department I suspect she's worked for the CIA in the past, but she's a very dangerous woman and very dodgy as, she's up to her eyeballs. She was behind a lot of that information, in regards to where she had a Freudian slip about the, those chemical labs and biological labs in the Ukraine. Yeah, so she's really a dodgy character. Yeah, look, I personally don't think that the view is entirely correct. And the reason for that is because, one, most research that has looked at this, because you can't do these long-term experiments on humans, but you're going to do them in other mammalian systems. When you give more protein to a rat or a chimp, all it does is it grows bigger, much bigger kidneys to cope. And obviously these animals, they just give them more protein. They don't give them shitloads of seed oils or sugar or stuff like that. And so because they're just focused on they're giving them their natural food, and then they're just giving them just a whole lot of casein, because it's usually casein protein. So, and they build bigger and bigger kidneys and become way more muscular. So I don't fear, I don't believe in that it's damaging to the kidneys or whatever, or any of this sort of stuff. What it will do is it will accelerate muscle growth, and some organ growth as well, like the kidneys and stuff like that, will actually become slightly bigger. doesn't have a negative effect to the heart, as long as you get enough taurine in that sort of prevents remodeling. Taurine actually has a controlling certain through the taut transporters in controlling a number of important regulatory pathways, and that's the important thing. It also prevents deuterium from opening up the DNA, and actually, because this is where deuterium can actually open up the DNA and increase proliferation, but taurine suppresses that. So that's an important factor there. So I don't see the problem under any circumstances. Sometimes we criticize certain things for things that are other things are doing it, and it's just a confounding variable in associated data. I always look at the design, what foods were used, how they were used, in what quantities and stuff like that. It sort of explains to me then, okay, there may be these effects at play. So once I've cleared out the variables, the confounding potential variables, then detail is everything. I think most studies, most people, when they look at them, even a randomized control study, you've got to look at the details. How was it constructed? What were the elements that were used in what proportions and stuff like that? And how do these things interact with each other? So I know it's getting a bit anal about it, but that's how I look at things. I really look at things in detail, and how the composition of these things can interact with each other, because then it sort of clears things up for me, how potentially whether there is or isn't something. So I just don't see it. If you eat more protein, all you're going to do is just going to slow down the digestion. So if you eat a small amount of protein, it'll take 2 hours to digest in the stomach. If you eat heaps and heaps, it can take 4 to 5 hours. We know that happens, which means that the rate at which it will end up in the small intestine to be absorbed within the amino pool will be basically at a similar rate that if you had 200 grams or 400 grams or a kilo or 2 kilos of meat. It just means that it'll take you hours to digest. This is why I always talk about eating daytime, because if you eat late quite a lot of meat, what you may be doing is you may be still trying to digest late at night, and that could affect your sleep quality. So, that's the only thing. That's why I personally cut it down to, I have 2 meals a day rather than a single meal like Bart does. So I can have one earlier, 11 o'clock in the, have half my intake then, and then the other half around 3 o'clock, which means that I'll have enough hours then to digest. So that's the sort of, and so I've never had any negative effects on my sleep. I just sleep like a baby. So anyway, get alpha is done. Now they don't know what pronoun they would call themselves. Oh shit! Oh, maybe that December maybe that October training thing that we have to do. We'll have to learn the new pronouns. Oh, fuck. I'll just tell them that's the only pronoun that I'll be telling them. Go F yourselves. I know what I'll do. I'll call in sick on the day. Not turn up. Then they'll put me in the category that has to do it next year, so I don't have to bloody do it. I've worked out my way out of it. Okay, any other Croats is about to ditch the kuna and adopt the euro as of January the 1st, I feel sorry for them. They should stay their own currency. Because if Europe implodes, for instance, everybody may be scrambling for a new currency. If you're in your own currency, you've already got some level of stability. So it's probably the worst time to be doing things like this. So what are they thinking, the politicians in Croatia? Crazy stuff. Absolutely crazy that you would think like that. Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, a lot of my subscribers. Oh, damn. You'll have to get a solar cell. That's it. And a windmill. But Harry said I shouldn't be buying a windmill or solar panel. Well, to watch me, you'll have to. You've got no option because the woke brigade has removed your fossil fuels option. So, okay, you guys are having a bit of a conversation about bodybuilding. Fair enough. And yeah, it's probably going to get a bit lower for a while, but it will come back up. So our own sort of central bank authorities are not going to. I think they're going to keep it around try and keep it around the mid 60 cents, which is equivalent to where it was. Actually, I think even in the 60s, it was around about that price at some point when we went over to decimal. That was in 66 when I was born. Because before that, we're on the pound. Money-wise, that is. Yeah, look, as I said, there's so much liquidity being sucked into the US at the moment that, that could reverse. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of other central banks and a lot of other institutions, a lot of other governments starting to do a number of things, even, let's say, privately, like the Japanese, and through through the Central Bank of Sweden and through a number of brokerage firms out of Hong Kong. So anyway, that's what they're doing. And then you've got the Chinese trying to swap US for yuan into Southeast Asia so they can provide them liquidity via the Chinese banking system. So there's a lot happening at the moment. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out in the next couple of years, because I don't think that the world's going to be very much the same in the next couple of years. We're living through a period of massive economic upheaval. I'm not kidding you. This is going to be extremely big, like 1929. So, and I'm not saying this to scare anyone. I'm just saying you've got to get prepared for it. You simply have to get prepared for it. You need to allocate resources, and you need to change some of your investment, the way you're currently set up, because the world's not going to be the same in the next couple of years. So, and I can't advise people. I can just tell you that this is what's going to happen, how it's going to play out, and things are going to get really hairy. And I think that's strong enough warning for you guys to realize that you need to start taking some proactive steps to better your position, is what I'm trying to say. Is that how you found my channel, actually? Oh, was it one of the videos that I did? Okay. Well, there you go, NTL. Hmm. So you came to this channel for a completely different reason. Oh well, that's good. At least I got at least some of those videos did have some value. That's good. The problem is also almost all meat has vegetable oil and sugar. I've been looking for a while. Oh, that's about the processed stuff we're saying. Okay, really? Huh. I can still find heaps of processed meat down here that's got no sugar and no vegetable oils. It's just cured meat with salt and stuff like that. Well, the other option is to make your own, to cure your own meat with salt. That's the other option. Because if you get it now and you cure it and store it away, then at least, yeah, that's sort of an option. Yeah, look, it's hard depending on people's circumstances and stuff like that, and as you said, we also the energy issue as well. That's just another headache of storing animal foods. If you've got blackouts and all sorts of things, the key thing is just remember, guys, when you get the power goes off or a bit of a blackout or whatever, do not open the fridge. Leave it shut, because what you're doing is you're holding in the cold. If you open up the fridge, you lose some of that cold temperature. So not a good idea. So unfortunately, if the power goes off, you've got to leave it closed. You can't access it until the power comes back on, because otherwise you've got to you're putting at risk the food from going off. So just keep that in mind. More about that. I'm shaking my head. We do not encourage such wild stuff. I'll leave it at that. Intravenous leucine. What are you thinking of? Are you drinking at the moment? Are you intoxicated? Anyway, no. Okay, again. Okay. Yeah, it's supply chain issues, Alex. Supply chain. Friggin' crazy. What is happening? There it is. Fatty Finn's basically been ordering it all. Really? Okay. It's available down here in Australia. So what's happening in Europe? Well, that's weird. Let me just check. Herbestrilla. Yeah, it's available down here. So you can add it to the cart. So it's currently available on the Australian. Maybe there's some sort of supply disruption issue to Europe. I don't know what's happening over there at the moment. Even my nephews are saying they can't get certain things. My niece and nephew, and they're having issues with being able to access things. You know, some people are saying you have to go to Athens to try and get things, and even there they struggle. So I think there's a lot of disruption in the supply chains throughout the whole of Europe. It's a bit of a mess at the moment. And I think that's, I don't think, because down here it's available and it's been available quite often. I mean, Hello Kitty's ordered, I've ordered, a number of people have ordered without any problems. So I have no idea what's happening in Europe. There is the option of Amazon. They have it, they stock it as well, but I'm not sure what the situation with them is. You'll have to look. Yeah, don't know. It's a bit of a number of people have been saying that they can't find things in either North America or in Europe, while in Asia, there's no problems down here in Australasia, no issue whatsoever. So I don't know whether it's a North American, European, or just European issue. Just don't know, mate. Yeah, just check out. See whether there is any, maybe there's another European site that may be selling it as well. So you might as well do a bit of a Google search and see whether you can find another place. Yeah, I know. I can't remember who was it. Was it Lilith? I can't remember who it was. Somebody in Britain was able to find it in some supplement place outlet. It's a bit more expensive, but they were able to find it locally. So it is available around in different places online with different online providers, plus some specialty supplement outlets also have it. So you just have to look, really. Yeah, you could do that. You could do that. See, there you go, Fatty Finn. Yeah, a bike, a generator, and then you can you could do the equivalent of, remember, rather than being on a treadmill, you could do the bike thing. Just think of it, the opposite of Dr. Gregor, So you could say, I'm doing a Gregor to generate energy. Something like that. Got to think of a comical thing. Well, exactly. If Gregor can do the treadmill thing while he's doing his stuff, you might as well just do the pedal thing. That's it. Uncomplicated. You guys are coming up with all sorts of ideas. I bought a freezer and have to go far filled it with 200 kilograms of meat, mostly beef rib roasts. Good. Yeah, that's the sort of thing. I mean, my deep fridge is just up to the chockers as well. So, but my supply here is fine. I sort of bought a lot of things, and now I'm sort of eating out of my fridge at the moment because I am keeping an eye on the supply. But I'm lucky that I can get my stuff directly from farmers that come into the city on the Sunday market, so I can go down. And luckily, their prices haven't changed. If they're still at pre-crisis prices, which is quite surprising. So I'm not knocking it. I'm quite happy about it. So I'm I'll be buying more from the farmers and less from the stores, pretty much. So if you look online, YouTube, there are channels looking at strategies from the Great Depression, including storing meats in animal fat and no fridge required. Yeah, there's a lot of sort of stuff like that that people have created channels specifically. Yeah, good idea actually. Fatty Finn. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. There are a number of. I remember seeing a couple of years back where people were going in and saying the essential stuff you need, how to store things, and how to prep for these sort of things. So there's a lot of prepper type channels that look into this, and I think everybody should look into some of this sort of stuff and get some ideas. You should be able to a strong human, strong man, a strong woman are people that are self-reliant, have got the ability to stand on their feet. Really important, guys. Anyway, it is shit, is at the time. So it's 12:44 here, and I better pull the pin. And Harry's driving the global taurine shortage. I probably am. I probably am. Singles. Exactly. Yeah, I know, Jonathan. I can't help it. See your mail, Harry. See my mail. See my mail. Let me quickly take a look. Yeah, I know it's a hassle if it's not available. It's not available. So it's been like that for a while. I didn't realize things were that disrupted in Europe. Bloody hell. Things are really off the rails over there. I knew energy was a problem, but it just seems like even companies aren't able to stock things. So maybe it's a cash flow. So that means that some companies are actually already undergoing some cash flow problems or liquidity issues. Interesting. Yeah. Don't know. It's not looking good. Yeah, I just saw the sort of out of stock. Back in stock date is unavailable at this time. Similar item to consider. Let's got the other one. Friggin' hell. Not looking good. G'day, Sammy. You're late. Just got here. You're still late. Use leucine always driving synthesis of collagenous beyond the non-collagenous protein cell. or proteins. Now, when it comes to osteoblasts and osteoclasts, there are a lot of things that actually influence that. Vitamin D, menaquinone 4, the also leucine plays a big role in that regard. But what is bone? It's mineralized collagen. That's what it is. So that's the normal turnover, but the actual driving of without leucine, you can't really. You still need some leucine signaling and for bones as well. So if you basically take out leucine completely and you created a leucine deficient diet in rats, that is, but I suspect in all mammals it'll work the same way, you will cause certain osteoporotic effects. It makes sense, I mean, bones are mineralized collagen, pretty much. The fat soluble, you still need collagen integrating enzymes, and you still need, like the osteoclasts, osteoblasts, you still need those to be regulated. But regulating collagen degrading enzymes is one thing, and turning over that, building the actual, that's a different thing. That sort of needs, because you need a certain level of protein synthesis. So bone gets turned over, but it also needs certain level of synthesis for it to be established. So it does play a role, so if you take leucine out, and that's another reason why leucine alone, putting in leucine can actually improve general anabolism and inhibit breakdown. So that's really important. That was what the last video was actually showing as well. And even in a fasted state. So that's the really interesting thing. Yeah. Bone is just pretty much mineralized collagen. So when we're talking about these sort of your vitamin D, your menaquinone 4 and all that, they're involved in working synergistically with leucine and stuff like that, while leucine is heavily on the side of the actual matrix of the collagen fibers and all that sort of stuff, where on the other hand, when we're talking about menaquinone 4 in particular, it's involved in activating the enzymes that are involved in mineralizing those bones. So, or mineralize, let me just say that again, mineralizing that collagen. So to be more precise, as Bart would say, use the right words to explain things. Otherwise, you end up creating confusion. And he's right. Anyway, yes, I better go. It's nearly 1 o'clock, and I do have work tomorrow. Yep. So thanks, guys, for turning up. I appreciate it. We had a bit of a chat. I had my little rant about the future. Yeah, guys, you really need to prepare. This one's going to be the big one. And I usually do not say that lightly. In the past, I've always said to people, "Yeah, it's going to be, but it'll be a correction." So yeah, in that regard, private the stream, Harry. I probably will. Not a problem. I think if I private and then put in a link in the community page, but I'll let it run for a while. I don't think they're, I am running under the radar at the moment. So you're welcome, guys. Appreciate it. With dry salami and I love salami and tuna cans. I do have some cans of number of seafood. So what I need to get is I need to get a bit of extra um, octopus and also calamari squid. That's what I need to do. I do have some in the fridge, calamari. I've got half of it because I ate the other half. Actually, I may have that on the weekend. Haven't had for a while any squid. So anyway, thanks guys. Appreciate it. See you, Tom, John. See you, Sammy. See you, Alex. See you, Lama. I'll let you know what day on the weekend. So I need to organise an interview with 2 other people this weekend. So yeah, that's for a video next, so. And I do need to contact 2 other people that I haven't spoken to for some time as well for potential future video. So I'll keep that under my cap. I won't say anything. It'll be a surprise. But yes, I do need to do that as well, get back into it. So anyway, guys, I'm out of here. See yous and good night.